Kentucky Sports Radio is at SEC Media Days here in Dallas, and we're joined by Andy Staples. Andy Staples on 3. If you aren't subscribed, what are you doing? Get over there. Do it right now. Andy has been covering college football for not too long. I'm going to say a long, long time, but okay, so you are old. We're confirmed old.
Okay.
But we're in the SEC footprint.
Yep.
We haven't been out of it. We haven't ventured out of it. I don't know what to expect from Texas. I don't know much about Texas. So what are we in store for? What's Big Blue Nation going to experience when they go down to 40 acres in November?
Oh, it's going to be, tons of good food. So you got to figure out what you want. You got to figure out your barbecue plan of attack. Okay. But don't just do barbecue. Ooh. Do some other variation. There's also burgers, tacos. Now, you could do a variation of barbecue. Like you do brisket ramen.
Brisket ramen?
Kamuri Tatsuyan. They also have octopus Frito pie at this place.
What?
Oh, yeah.
So what you're saying is Texas rules. Pretty much.
Yeah, there's a place called Loro that's like Korean, Mexican fusion barbecue. It's unbelievable. They wontons and guacamole. It sounds weird. You will not stop eating them. You'll just be the whole time.
I'm a little speechless. Is brisket the preferred? Is brisket the best barbecue?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I grew up in the deep South, so I'm a pork guy for the most part. Like pulled pork sandwiches, pork ribs. In Texas, they have what they call the Texas Trinity, which is brisket, pork ribs, and sausage. And I like sausage, but it does terrible things to me. So,
fair.
like brisket and pork ribs are the two things I'm probably going to get the most. But then the thing about the Texas folks is they do beef rib too. And the beef rib is sort of the Cadillac order. It's the thing that now, of course, with beef prices, it's like $48 for one. But if you want the impressive tray with just the giant long bone, the huge meaty rib, like that's what you're going for.
So on a serious football question with Texas, the 2005 team, that was for a Kentucky basketball-centric state. That was the first year that everybody in my middle school had an opinion about college football because USC dominated the sport. Vince Young comes in. He's awesome on the video game. Video game's very hot on the streets topic right now. But we've always heard this notion of Texas being back. Can they ever be back in the SEC?
Were they ever... See, the thing that you have to remember about Texas is they're historically inconsistent. Texas has not had these massive... Like, Oklahoma is the one that has the massive periods of dominance. Texas has had some good stretches, but they've also had some lows. Like, they're much more they're more like Auburn, like roller coaster ride. Actually, USC is probably the best example where they've got all the resources, they've got the location, they've got the name, but they've had these really up and down, and when they're up, they're really up, but they also can be really down. And, you know, I think that's what makes them weird. Like, it's very strange because Oklahoma is the more consistent program through the years. Texas has all the capability to do everything. And then when you saw, like, 2005 is when they put it all together. But that Mac Brown run was pretty spectacular. You know, from 2000 to 2009, Texas was awesome. I guess you can go back to 98 when Ricky Williams won the Heisman, but, you know, Texas was awesome during that span. And then they wandered through the wilderness for a while. Like, that's the thing. They have that tendency, and they've done that in the past as well. So, you know, we'll see, because Texas is good right now. I don't know how long that's going to last. None of us does.
Yeah. That's what's fascinating to me, I think, with this transition, is because we've known Oklahoma to just be consistent, top 10, consistent. But now it's kind of flipped. Like, it seems like Texas is entering the league in better position, but we don't know if is Texas about to go on a decade run, or was that a one-year wonder type thing? That's what's so fascinating, I think, and we don't really know, because there's a lot of unknowns. Saban's gone. There's a lot of unknowns, I think, outside of the juggernaut in Athens. Like, where does the hierarchy end up? And that's why this year, on top of the playoff and revenue sharing and all that coming, it's why it's so, like, intriguing entering the season.
Well, remember the last time the SEC added teams? So Texas A&M and Missouri come in. Texas A&M was amazing right out of the chute. That's Johnny Football wins the Heisman that season. They go 10-2. If there had been a 12-team playoff, they'd have been the team nobody wanted to play in the 12-team playoff. Might have won the national title. They beat the national champ on the road that season. So, but who's had the more successful run in the SEC, A&M or Missouri? It's easily Missouri. I'll help you there.
2 SEC championship game appearances.
SEC East wins, and they were really good last year. Like they've been more consistent over the years, and so I think you got to take that into consideration. Like Texas is there right now, but Oklahoma's going to be fine because Oklahoma is never bad. Like they've had one down period in their entire history as a program, and that was the mid to late '90s essentially. They had
Schnellenberger.
Weird Schnellenberger, well, then John Blake, yeah. And then once Bob Stoops got hired, that's it. They're great again, and great for a long time. Because you think about as good as those Texas teams were we just talked about, who won more Big 12 titles during that stretch? Oklahoma did. So I have no doubt that Oklahoma's going to be fine. It's tough to come into the SEC in a year when you're retooling your offensive line completely, but that's not really, that's just sort of the breaks of the game in this case. But I will say, since Brent Venables has been there, he's worked pretty hard to get their roster into a shape that it should be as they enter the SEC. If Lincoln Riley had stayed, I don't know that they would have had the right kind of roster coming in. But this is as deep defensively as Oklahoma's been in a long time. And you got to remember, when Venables was the DC at Clemson, what was Clemson's goal every year? They were trying to win a national title, and they knew to do it, they were going to have to play Alabama or whoever came out of the SEC and have to be able to be as good as them. So Venables knew exactly what kind of roster he had to build, whereas I think a lot of other people might not. Now, Steve Sarkisian, same thing. He worked at Alabama, understood what he's going to be up against, and began recruiting to it immediately. Because remember, we find out that Texas is coming to the league right before Sarkisian's first season. Now, he'd been hired, he'd had a pretty full offseason, and then we find out at SEC Media Days they're coming. I'm sure he found out significantly before that, but probably not. That's probably not something he was told when he got hired, because I don't know that those conversations had even started yet. So he's done a good job, and really from that first full recruiting class after you found out they were going to the SEC, that class of 22, which is where a lot of their starting offensive linemen came from. Kelvin Banks, their left tackle, was in there. DJ Campbell was in there. That one sort of said to the world, we're taking this seriously. We're going to try to build in the trenches so that when we get to the SEC, we'll fit in.
I think that's the reason why you would buy stock on Texas. It's because they're building a team to beat in Alabama, to beat a Georgia on a neutral field in December or whatever, January, in game 15. They're building a roster like that, and that's why. But it's interesting, to Andy's point, is because we haven't really seen them do it back-to-back years in a long time. So what's to say? And Steve I can't talk now. Sark has a checkered past. Like last year, before going into last year was like, can he win double-digit games? Can he do it? And now you're asking, can he do it year over year over year? And they're like, and they're Texas. They got cool colors, and they got the logo, and they're just a fascinating team, I think, heading into the year. And really, I don't think anybody knows kind of where to put. I know where to put them this year, but maybe not next year, in 5 years, or in 10 years.
And I think, if they I think the NIL era has been good for them. I think they figured that part out. They can use those resources. And because remember, as great as Texas's resources were, they still weren't getting the best players. They were getting good recruits, but Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, they were getting the best recruits. Well, Texas is getting some of those guys now. Yeah. Oregon is getting some of those guys now. So the gap is closing between the superpowers and the ones who are in that next level down. And so Texas can make itself a superpower, or at least help close the gap some more and make it where instead of this little tiny select group, there's this bigger group of teams that's capable of playing for national titles.
To bring it a little bit back to Kentucky, going into the 16-team SEC, I think if you went back, I don't know, to tradition, right? We talk about history. Yep. History says if this happens in any other era, Kentucky's walking into a buzzsaw. Oh, yeah. And it's just the program systemically is just not set up for that. But if you want to make a case for Mark Stoops' greatest accomplishment, his greatest legacy, it's having a roster that's ready for the SEC in this form. But it still might not be good enough. So I think that's my question to you is, can it be done, and does it have to be done this year when they do have a very experienced roster going up against this tough schedule?
It doesn't have to be done this year, because I think you've seen over the years that Stoops has been able to consistently reproduce quality rosters. Like They can evaluate, they can develop. I don't think they're ever going, as long as Stoops is there, they're not ever going back to what they were. Now, the question is, how much will Kentucky fans clamor to go up a level? And I think that's harder. I think for all the non-Georgia SEC East teams, the world has gotten much more difficult.
Yeah.
For the SEC West teams, the old SEC West teams, they're going to be like, well, our schedule was already hard. Like, ours was already brutal. There's nothing you can do to us that will hurt us now.
Yeah.
But if you're Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Vandy.
Not Missouri this year.
And Missouri, like, yeah. And now, no, Missouri's got a nice draw this year. That's true. But yeah. Tennessee did too, actually. But for the most part, your schedule is going to be harder most years than it was. So, and you're looking at Florida and Georgia this year. They got the bad end of the stick. Like, they got the draw. Right. So,
you have 4 road games at Florida, at Ole Miss, at Texas, and at Tennessee.
Oh, that's super easy.
Yeah. Of those 4 games, let's throw Florida out because Kentucky wins.
They did win the last time there.
Kentucky wins there now. It's weird. They can win 4 in a row. But so let's say the other 3.
Yep.
We've learned Mark Stoops over the years. He'll probably lose a game he shouldn't. He'll probably win a game he shouldn't. So what's the most likely win that he probably shouldn't get on paper? And you know what? You might even throw Auburn at home in there.
Well, the Auburn thing's amazing to me because it feels like so many, and then Kentucky fans are not guilty of this, but so many other fan bases that have Auburn on the schedule are just penciling in Auburn as a win. I'm like, did you guys not watch you freeze at Ole Miss? Have you not learned your lesson here?
Yeah.
Like, this is not a cakewalk team. But as far as those road games go, none of them sound appealing, those 3 that you gave me. Like, I was just going to say Florida because, like, that's they seem to be fine against Florida now. But I guess Tennessee. But I don't, like, Tennessee's going to be really good this year. I don't think people understand how limited their offense was with Joe Milton and how much better it's going to be with Nico.
Yeah, and like we've been cheering for Nico's downfall. Yeah,
the volleyball player.
Yeah. We've been hoping for it, but like that feels like wishful thinking.
Yeah.
And it's also Tennessee. We've seen this song and dance before, but I don't know about you, like it, but like the Ole Miss, how close Kentucky has played them over the years, has me intrigued by it.
Yeah. The one thing on Ole Miss, and this is more of a general question, Andy. Like, I keep waiting for the transfer thing to maybe blow up on him one year. When does that happen?
Chemistry keep working.
When does it blow up? And we talk about that a lot locally with Louisville. Like, this is what Brom's doing is eventually not. This isn't going to work. It doesn't make sense in my how to build a roster mind that you can do this. But like, is there a team that you're looking at this week that maybe is, you know, a top 10 or playoff contender, a lot of playoffs that you think you could see like coming up short? Like, who is the team that you know falls on their face this year?
Well, Ole Miss is the one that everybody seems worried about. But the thing, and that's for the reasons you just suggested. Like, how can they continue to have good chemistry when they basically revamp the roster every single season? And I would argue that you haven't watched how they've done this if you think that's what's going to happen, if you think they'll just fall apart. Because they've done a good job of taking guys, for the most part, with a ton of eligibility left. Now, this is like the Walter Nolan, Princely Mamnie Ellen is a little bit different thing, where those guys, they're off to the NFL after this year. But for the most part, Ole Miss has taken guys that had more time, and that has actually helped them kind of congeal. And I was talking to Jared Ivey about this today. Jared's been there 3 years. This is 3 years now. He was at Georgia Tech for 2 years early in his career. The core of their team came from somewhere else, but has been there for a while. And that's, they kind of know how they play together.
There's certainly value in that. Can I watched Shane Beamer go up there today, and there's just everything in my soul just, it like cringes, and he's talking about Rocket being a Rocket. The South Carolina game can be the swing game for the season. What could South Carolina do that would maybe make Kentucky fans a little worried that somehow this dork is going to beat them 3 straight seasons?
That Lenoris Sellers is the X factor that he might be.
But if he was, wouldn't Beamer just say, "You're the quarterback, go do it"?
No, they're sandbagging. Remember Manziel in 2012? Remember when they announced him as the starter?
People said who?
It was like the week of the first game. Like they ran that thing, but they knew all along who the starter was going to be.
Okay, so you're saying that maybe he is the Tebow that they talked about as a recruit that could come up. Maybe Nick Harbor can play receiver, even though he should be a defensive lineman.
Well, look, listen. You can't have an Olympic sprint career as a defensive lineman. I guess apparently that seems to be the consensus. So that I'm curious to see what they do with Nick Harper. But the thing about South Carolina is they have, of teams at that level, they have gotten more kind of special blue chip talent than anybody else. Like even more than maybe Auburn, because Cam Coleman now at Auburn, but the last few years Auburn hasn't been doing that. The Brian Harsin years were a thing. So, but South Carolina has some actually really special players. Now, do they have a very deep roster? No. I still worry about their offensive line, but if Lenora Sellers is very special, he can elevate them, and that's where you have to worry if you're playing them, if they've got a truly dangerous quarterback, and we don't know that until we see him.
You got anything else?
Another thing, you don't know if it's Anthony Richardson stuck in a system around that's not the pieces do not fit, or is it a version of Dak Prescott at Mississippi State where they just take off.
I would argue that Kentucky just broke Anthony Richardson. That's the look on his face after that one-handed interception.
Yeah.
Or when even sooner when the little linebacker from Ole Miss picked him up and suplexed him. He was like, that doesn't happen.
Andy, you're talking college football all season long. If y'all aren't subscribed, like I said, do it. It's a great show, live, 8 a.m. every day on all of the YouTubes and Twitters and X's, whatever.
My Eastern time brethren, that's beautiful.
Yes.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it.
I'm thrown off all this week, Central Time. But there's thousands and thousands of reasons to be excited about this college football season. But you got to pick one, right? What's going to be your favorite thing to talk about on a regular basis throughout this crazy college football season?
Just the playoff race, because there's going to be so many teams in it. In the 14 playoff, there's by the middle of October, there's 6 teams left truly in contention.
Right.
At that point, there's going to be 25 teams in contention, and I think you'll probably be still around 20 when you get into November. And I think that's going to be great. We're going to be scoreboard watching like crazy. We're going to be watching this Big 12 game to see how it affects this Big 10 team, this ACC game to see how it affects the SEC team. It's going to be so much fun.
It's going to feel more like we're NCAA tournament resume watching, right? Little scoreboard math?
Absolutely. Now, with Kentucky, that's not usually a problem. They're usually safely in. But, the bubble watch for this is gonna be like the basketball bubble watch on steroids.
Spreadsheets will be popping. We'll be crunching numbers. And if you're 6-2 entering November, you're alive. You're more than alive. You're playing real meaningful football games. You're playing what you could say postseason games. I mean, we might get Kornacki up there drawing up what the percentages are. We don't know. It's just going to be wild, and it's going to be our first time all of us have experienced it. So we really don't know, and we don't know what the committee is going to value one year to the next. We've learned this from March all these years, and so that's going to be a thing that swings every year, and it's just going to, I think, it's going to give programs like Kentucky, if you can get to 6-2, 7-1 start, if you're having a good year, you're going to be not only alive, but even if you don't make it, you're going to be playing in games that are really, really important, and you're also going to get to play spoiler, Nick.
Kentucky's had a few seasons in the last few years. There's one where they would have made it, and then there's a couple where they would have been in the thick of it right up until the end.
Yeah.
So I think that's exciting.
They're playing spoiler with your rival. I mean, they would have spoiled Louisville's playoff chances last year.
Absolutely, and I would vote for them to continue doing that until Louisville proves otherwise.
And it's like the backyard brawl when Pitt beat West Virginia, what 13-7?
13-7, yeah, the Steve Slayton, Pat White.
I mean, that is what makes college football great, and it's kind of hater mentality and loser mentality, but ruining your least favorite team's best season ever is almost as good as having that great season.
It's right up there.
Man, and it's going to be here before you know it. College football will be here in no time. We appreciate y'all following us. Follow along Andy Staples on 3. We'll see y'all around.